Would you be seated, please, to start?
Ho preso mica su Fox, avevo visto il Cavaliere lì, però vedevo delle appunti qua.
Io ho la scrittura più giornalistica.
Le faccio vedere la mia, perché non mi capiscono nemmeno io spesso.
Chi ha un cuscino? Come quando andavo dal barbiere da piccolo.
Actually, very interested in very interesting. One, they thought they were anarchists. No, not really, but they can make two interventions from the phone.
Yes, good morning. Good morning, everybody. I would like to welcome you all to this second day's morning session. Esteemed colleagues and the guests, let me begin by expressing my sincere gratitude to the Italian delegation to the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly for hosting this important two-day Inter-Parliamentary Conference in the beautiful premises of the Italian Parliament. Eugenio, your dedication and leadership in bringing us together for this initiative are truly commendable. Thank you for your marvelous job, as you have done so far. I think this is not the first time anyway. We are getting accustomed to it now. Yes. It is an honor to welcome you all to the second day of our deliberations, during which we will focus on the terrorism trends in the OSCE region. As chair of the OSCPA's Ad Hoc Committee on Countering Terrorism, I have consistently underlined the importance of addressing the growing nexus between terrorism and transnational organized crime. Deepening our understanding of this complex relationship is essential to effectively counter both threats which increasingly fuel one another. Terrorist organizations often depend on criminal networks for funding, weapons, logistics, and recruitment. Illicit activities such as drug trafficking, human smuggling, arms trading, and money laundering are not peripheral. They are critical enablers of terrorist operations. Today's session will also focus on one of the most alarming developments in our region and beyond, the radicalization of youth to violent extremism. This issue has been a growing priority for the CCT since our winter meeting in Vienna, where we discussed the role of education and digital literacy in preventing terrorism. It featured prominently again during our recent visit to the United States, where we met with local authorities, experts, and frontline practitioners working to counter violent extremism. One key takeaway from that visit was the urgent need to address how social media algorithms amplify harmful content and how AI-driven recruitment tactics, including gamification, deepfakes, and disinformation, are increasingly targeting vulnerable truth and youth, of course. These techniques are sophisticated, fast evolving, and dangerously effective. This reinforces our determination to develop robust policy guidance and to strengthen collaboration with the private sector, particularly technology companies. We cannot afford to leave our youth exposed to extremist manipulation in digital spaces, whether on social media platforms or within online gaming environments. Today's discussion is a valuable opportunity for us as parliamentarians to exchange views on how to safeguard the next generation from the influence of terrorism and violent extremism. To support this effort, the CCT will be tabling a supplementary item at our upcoming annual session in Porto titled Preventing Youth Radicalization to Violent Extremism and Terrorism Through Education and Media and Information Literacy. This draft resolution emphasizes the importance of equipping our youth with the critical thinking skills through targeted civil education and media literacy programs. I calls for a whole-of-society approach, engaging educators, families, communities, and digital platforms alike. Finally, it urges closer monitoring and regulation of AI tools, as well as stronger efforts to prevent algorithmic bias and misuse for violent extremist purposes, always in full respect of human rights and fundamental freedom, of course. Dear colleagues, allow me to speak frankly. I am deeply concerned about our capacity to respond to new forms of violent extremism, where ideological boundaries blur and destruction becomes the only goal. These threats come on top of those posed by international terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and are compounded by the misuse of emerging technologies. I'm eager to hear more from our distinguished guest speakers today and to learn from their expertise and perspectives. Following the presentations, we will open the floor for debate, of course, because this is a very crucial topic that I think everybody is going to say something and make some comment as well. Should you wish to make a short intervention, please register with our senior advisor, Mr. Marco Bonabello, sitting next to me within the next 30 minutes. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, to begin, I am pleased to give the floor to Mr. Emanuele Porfido, member of the Italian delegation to the OSCPA and Vice Chair of the Ad Hoc Committee on Countering Terrorism. I suppose that he will tell you more about the key trends encountered in our work. Emanuele, I am eager to hear your perspective and contribution, which will set the scene for the ensuing expert presentations. You have the floor, my dear friend.
Good morning and to everybody, and welcome again. Let me go on speaking in Italian, being so lucky that Italian is an official language of our organization. Innanzitutto,
first of all, I would like to thank our chair, Eugenio Zoffili, for his great intuition in choosing this topic and in deciding to focus on organized crime and terrorism, which is an extremely relevant topic today. I would also like to thank the Foreign Relations Department of the Italian Parliament, because they were able to do an excellent job in organizing this two-day conference. Of course, we had some very intense few weeks in organizing the conference and in agreeing on all the details. At the same time, I hope that the welcome we've extended has allowed you to experience a little bit of Italy through its flavors, its art, its spirit, its humanity, and of course also through the vibrant and endearing character of our beloved eternal city. I would also like to thank our President Pia Kauma for her unwavering support and close engagement with the Counter-Terrorism Committee. And I would also like to thank Secretary General Roberto Montella for his valuable and timely contribution. I would also like to thank our chair, Kamil Aydin, for his daily dedication and ability to actively involve every single member in the work of the committee. And finally, let me thank the OSCE Secretariat, led by Marco Bonello. I would kindly ask him to convey our sincere gratitude to his entire staff. Without their constant and highly professional support, which is all the more essential given the temporary nature of our parliamentary roles, the committee would not be able to ensure such continuity and quality in its work. Thank you all very much. It is a privilege to host this very important event here at the Italian Parliament, and it's for me an honor to participate in this panel as Vice President of the Ad Hoc Committee on Countering Terrorism of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. As we focus today on terrorism trends across the OSCE region, I would like to share some insights gained through recent activities of our committee. These include the United Nations Coordination Mechanism of Parliamentary Assemblies on Counterterrorism from 2022 to 2024. We engaged with 17 regional assemblies worldwide. And then we had official visits in Turkey in 2024 and in the United States earlier this year. Several key trends have emerged from these engagements, which I will now briefly illustrate. First of all, global terrorist threats and conflicts. At the global level, the fight against terrorist groups such as ISIS and Al-Qaeda remains a top priority, particularly when taking into account their affiliates in West Africa and the Sahel region, in East Africa as well, for example, Al-Shabaab. The destabilizing role of Iran-backed actors, including Houthis, Hamas and Hezbollah, also demands our continued vigilance. We must closely monitor new developments in conflict-affected regions such as Ukraine, the Middle East and Syria. These theaters can act as catalysts for violent extremism, even within our own borders. The recent assassination of 2 Israeli diplomats in Washington, D.C. illustrates dramatically how distant events can also have deadly and local consequences. Equally concerning is the continued detention of thousands of foreign fighters in makeshift camps in Syria and Iraq following the territorial defeat of Daesh. These individuals represent a latent threat, one that could reignite if conditions permit. Meanwhile, lone actor attacks, often inspired rather than directed by extremist ideologies, remain the most immediate threat across Europe. Preventing such assaults on soft targets remains extremely challenging and requires our constant vigilance. Ultimately, in order to counter these evolving threats, robust international cooperation and real-time intelligence sharing are essential. Another area of growing concern is the misuse of emerging technologies that are used by terrorist groups. They are leveraging artificial intelligence, drones, 3D printing, encrypted communication platforms in order to advance their agendas. Social media algorithms are increasingly manipulated to radicalize users by exposing them to extreme content. Recruitment thrives on encrypted platforms like Telegram, while peer-to-peer networks allow for the viral spread of propaganda. AI is also enabling terrorist content to reach broader audiences, thanks to automatic translation in multiple languages, including English, thus expanding ideological resonance. On the financial front, cryptocurrencies continue to pose challenges for investigators. They obscure the flow of funds and complicate efforts to disrupt terrorist financing networks. Addressing the nexus between technology, organized crime, and terrorism demands a coordinated, multidimensional response. And now I'll draw the conclusions. One of the most troubling developments we encountered during our visit to the US is the rise of the so-called nihilistic violent extremism. Unlike other forms of radicalization, this phenomenon lacks a clear ideological foundation. Instead, it is rooted in rage, alienation, and rejection of societal norms. What makes it particularly alarming is that violence is an end in itself and not a means to achieve political or religious goals. This represents a dangerous evolution in extremist behavior, and one we must seek to understand and address more fully. Adding to our concerns is the deliberate targeting of children and teenagers with violent and extremist content online. Even though they're not always classified as terrorism, these campaigns aim to desensitize the youth, to blur ideological boundaries and normalize violence. The convergence of youth radicalization and nihilistic extremism should be a wake-up call for all of us. These trends erode social cohesion. They demand urgent attention, not only from policymakers, but also from educators, families, and civil society. To meet these challenges, we must do two different things. First of all, we need to strengthen the oversight of digital spaces to reduce exposure to toxic content. And on the other hand, we need to deepen the engagement with schools, parents, communities, in order to build societal resilience. This includes forging meaningful partnerships with technology companies, as well as placing media literacy, digital citizenship, and civic education at the heart of our strategies, at the heart of our counter-radicalization strategies. This is precisely what our committee calls for in the new draft resolution, which we kindly ask you to support and which we will present at the upcoming OSCE EPA session in Porto. It is a proactive response to evolving threats and a testament to our commitment to staying ahead of the curve. Together with my colleagues, I remain committed to ensuring that the committee can anticipate emerging challenges and so that it fosters innovation in counterterrorism and promotes deeper cooperation across the whole region. Our recent visit to the US served not only as a way of understanding the evolving counterterrorism landscape, but also as a way of reinforcing transatlantic trust and cooperation. Countering terrorism and violent extremism is not just a national priority. Based on what we heard yesterday and what we will hear today, it is clearly a shared responsibility. It's a kind of responsibility that calls for cohesive, coherent, and inclusive responses throughout the whole OSCE region. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to the committee and for the attention given to these issues.
Thank you, dear Mr. Leporfido. Thank you for underscoring the important work of the CCT in this field, while also taking stock of our official visit to the United States. Indeed, the CCT's hallmark lies its forward-looking approach and capacity to stay ahead of the emerging trends. Mr. Leporfido has done so far a great contribution to our Ad Hoc Committee, especially with reference to this youth radicalization and the education of the youth. Thank you once again. Yes, dear guests, my dear colleagues, our next speaker is Serge Strubans, Director of Operation for Europe and the MENA region at the Institute for Economics and Peace, an organization internationally renowned for its data-driven work on peace and security, and especially for its Global Terrorism Index, the leading annual report on global terrorism trends. Mr. Strubans brings a unique perspective as both a practitioner and an academic. A former lieutenant colonel in the Belgian Armed Forces, he has over 25 years of operational experience in multinational logistics within Belgium and NATO EU commands. He also holds advanced degrees in military, social, and political sciences from several European institutions. Dear Mr. Strubans, it's an honor for us to hear from you and from your expertise today. I look forward to your snapshot about major terrorist-related developments and trends in 2024. Serge, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, sir, and thank you very much to the organizers for having the Institute for Economics and Peace presenting today. It's really an honor to collaborate with you and to come back to Rome to present the results of the Global Terrorism Index 2025 this year, which of course is based on data collected in 2024. So we are an Australian think tank based out of Sydney, Australia. We have offices throughout the world, and we always work at the intersection between business, peace and economics, trying to measure and quantify peace. Terrorism is one of the 23 indicators we use in a global peace index. So that's the type of work we are doing. When we look at this overview, we of course can use the color code and see where the hotspots are or the countries most impacted. Countries in green, which are quite scarce on the map, are countries which did not experience any attack in the past 5 years. So when you look at this, you can always see three main regions in which terrorism is impacting very, very heavily. First of all, the epicenter of terrorism, which would be the Sahel region, but you can really reduce that to three countries most impacted: Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger. Then you shift to the Middle East, where we see that Syria, especially in 2024, then with the transition phase there, was heavily impacted also. Let's see what this is going to, how this is going to develop in 2025 and the years to follow. We have had a good example of Iraq. Iraq has decreased, has been in the past 20 years the highest impacted country by terrorism over a period of 15 to 20 years, and since 2007 we have seen a decrease of 99% of the impact of terrorism in Iraq, which is basically a very strong position, a very strong success for a country like this. And then we continue to shift to what we call South Asia, countries like Pakistan, Afghanistan. Pakistan is the country in which we have the fastest growing terrorist groups, for example, the fastest growing impact of terrorist groups in Pakistan. So what happened there in the past few months was basically not a surprise, looking at several groups who developed there very rapidly in the past years. So if we move on, if we look at some key findings, we can see that we are somehow, for a period of 3 to 5 years now, on a plateau where the number of attacks and casualties remained almost equal every year. So there is a consolidation of the impact of terrorism over the past years. What we also see is that the number of countries which were attacked, basically experienced an attack, grew from 58 to 66. Now we saw that more countries deteriorated on the index rather than improving. So what we see there is, for those who thought that terrorism was maybe a phenomenon of the past who really hit us in 2010, no, it's still there and it's still growing. I would say it's growing again. What we also see is that almost 100%, so 98% of all terrorist attacks occur in a country which is in a conflict zone. So there's a very strong, a very deep correlation between conflict and the use of terrorism, which is technique, tactic and procedure used in certain forms of combat, which we see in most of the conflict zones also. It is also important to understand that we live today in a world that is facing close to 70 conflicts. Last year, about this time, when we were presenting the Global Peace Index 24, 56 conflicts. And I was already saying that this was the highest number since the Second World War. 1 year later, we added about 15 conflicts to this level. So we can clearly see the impact of current international relations on the level of impact and the investment in defense instead of investment in peace, I would say, and definitely also a correlation there between the number of conflicts and the use of terrorism as a technique, tactic and procedure in those conflicts also. We see that there is a concentration on, I would say, most experienced groups in the world, killing more people, being more effective. Sorry to use this term, but being more effective in the attacks that they are committing. We, of course, as I said before, the Taliban in Pakistan, so TTP, fastest growing terrorist organization with that up 90% in the past year, and we have seen that it continues in 2025. For all region, or at least the region that is under discussion in the past days, we've seen that 7 countries today are in the top 50 of the Global Peace Index. That was not the case the year before. We've seen a strong increase in the number of European countries being attacked and being under the threat. What we also see is that in those countries, the main threat is lone actors. So basically, very, very difficult for security and intelligence forces to identify and to combat. Let us say that the haystack became very large and the needle is becoming smaller and smaller and smaller also there. So we see that 93% of deaths are caused in the West by lone actors, and that those lone actors are three times more chances to be successful rather than larger groups. I think with the crush on Daesh and maybe other organizations, we basically took away the capability to impact us really with large attacks like the Bataclan, so November 2015 in Paris. So this capacity has disappeared, but therefore, of course, they reshifted to the influence, mostly online, of people which they can influence to commit an attack. And so I think they are now shifting towards a more present threat and a higher number of attacks in countries, basically keeping the pressure on. But therefore, unfortunately, those attacks are not so successful in the number of casualties which they are producing, but they are very successful in the psychological trauma and the psychological impact that they can, I would say, generate. When we look at the Islamic State, so again, for those who thought that this was an organization from the past, they hit one more country last year than the year before, and you will see later on, I have a few graphs for you also, that this is basically, for them, there was not really, in the number of countries, not really an impact on their activities, so to speak. That's another visualization, basically, with the number of incidents, and I would say the number of casualties. So the larger the red dot, well, the higher the amount of casualties. I guess we recognize the three main centers of interest there with the Sahel, the MENA region, and South Asia. But what's really interesting, especially the 4 region, is this variety of red dots in Europe. That wasn't there the year before, the years before also. When you open the time window to about 15 years, you can see, of course, there is a variation. There was a peak in 2016-17, and then a decrease after that, kind of a plateau, and then we started to grow again the impact of terrorism. Of course, you see also a redistribution of the highest impact in specific regions, most impacted, and we see that today the Sahel region is really the most impacted region. 50% of all casualties fall in the Sahel. In the number 1 on the global terrorism index, Burkina Faso is responsible for 20% of all casualties. When you open that to the top 10 of the global terrorism index, they are already responsible for 86% of all terrorism casualties in the world, which is showing you this very strong geographical concentration of the problem as such. Of course, you see a lot of red dots in Europe, and this is concerning, or at least the OSCE region. This is concerning, but you need to understand that this is focusing on maybe the last 1 or 2% of the impact of terrorism, even if it's also important for the region in which we live. I think what is really interesting in this slide also, and maybe not so remarkable than the other two conclusions that I already drew on this graph, is the fact that you have this lower level, this light gray zone at the bottom, which is telling you that no matter what's happening in those most impacted regions, you will always have a residual impact of terrorism, which basically over the time is not really changing. So there is always there. This is a political phenomenon that we are facing and we will continue to face also. When we look at the motivations for terrorism in the West, we see that, of course, first of all, we have been less targeted, although last year we saw this increase. We also see that it's very difficult to allocate a lot of those lone wolf actors' actions, and I will explain to you later why it becomes more and more difficult. But when we look at the motivation for the use of terrorism in the West, we see that political motivations, so far right, far left and far right, have, as overseas, now the religious motivation. And when we look within this political motivation, we see that far left is much more impactful, at least in the number of attacks, than far right. Talking about the lone wolf terrorism, so we see that, as I said before, 92 to 93% is lone wolf, very difficult to identify them and stop them. What I also want to say about this is maybe 2 or 3 things. We see that radicalization is going much faster today, and definitely youth radicalization. I know that the next speaker will also produced an article for the Global Terrorism Index this year, is much more a specialist in this, so I will leave her the floor for that. But we see that radicalization is going much faster, where in 2002 it was 16 months, or estimation 10 months, now we talk about weeks. What we also see, of course, this is done online, but I think what is really interesting there, but in a negative way, of course, is to see how many young people are attracted by terrorism. We we had an incident in Belgium a couple of days ago with a child, 11 years old, you know, fleeing police, being chased by police, and unfortunately being hit by a police car and dying. And then, of course, everybody is going mad about the fact that this is only an 11 or 12-year-old child. But what we see online is that we find those children, 12, 13 years old, already radicalizing, actively radicalizing, and also shifting towards the use of violence and the use of terrorist techniques also. So we need to put everything in perspective there and understand what's really going on. So, of course, you saw these reasons, which are the obvious reasons why people would turn into violence and into terrorist techniques also. But I think what we need to understand is that radicalization today is not anymore in one specific form of ideology. So we see that those kids, and you'll see those figures, 42% of the arrestants in the UK are under 18, 20% for the entire EU. So this is showing you also the proportion of this problem of youth radicalization. What we see there is that they basically go online and find justification for the use of violence or for the use of extreme violence. So they basically pick and choose whatever they can find, far left, far right, religious, what is there, and of course this is pushed en masse towards them. And what we see there is basically somebody not adhering to an ideology and then turning violent. It's basically somebody who wants to be violent turning to trying to find an ideology to justify the use of this violence. This is showing you the lone wolf terrorist attack. So that's a graph where you see that the evolution, we really saw this growth after the crash in 16-17, shifting to I would say more lone wolf terrorist attacks. There's maybe one remark to say about this. What we have seen, either by this multinational joint task force in northeastern Nigeria or the coalition against Daesh in Syria and Iraq, or even a collaboration within Europe or within the OSCE, we've seen that a security crash or a security effort is necessary to bring the figures down. To have this decrease or this steep decrease in the number of attacks, the number of casualties worldwide, or in the region of interest. That is absolutely fine, but security only is not going to solve your problem of terrorism. Security only is not going to solve your problem of violence. What you need to do during this security positive impact, is transform your societies. And that is valid, of course, in these epicenters. Of course, we need to do something about the Sahel. We are working on the Middle East, and of course, we need to solve what's happening in Southeast Asia. But we need to do the same in our own societies also. When we look at Europe or the broader Europe and even globally, we have seen that in the past 10 years, for example, so since the peak of terrorism, the level of civil unrest in our societies has grown threefold, so 300% more civil unrest in our societies. So for those who would ask me today, are we more or less at risk than 10 years ago, I would tell them, first of all, terrorism is still there. Second of all, it's much more difficult to identify radicalization and also identify those lone wolves. Third of all, our society has become more violent and more fragile and unstable. And fourth of all, to take a national example from the country I'm coming from, the police forces or security forces dedicated to, first of all, intelligence forces identify, I would say, chase and maybe stop, and then of course security forces, has been cut in half because Belgium is facing also other problems than terrorism also. So for those asking me, are we in a better position today than we were 10 years ago when we have been targeted in our capitals, I would say I don't think so. So if we continue, this is basically showing you all the locations in which the Islamic State and its affiliates have produced an attack in the past year. So of course you see this concentration in the three epicenters, so they're absolutely there, most prolific group in the world also, especially in the regions outside of Europe, influencing what's happening in Europe. When we look at the number of casualties for the Islamic State, we can clearly see that since 2017, the majority and the crush and the coalition against Daesh and the security crush in this region, the majority of the death caused by IS were outside of Iraq and Syria, so basically in the 22 countries that I've shown to you before. This is reinforcing a point that was made in the intro speech. What we see is the use of emerging technologies such as AI by those terrorist groups. So basically the messaging, the narrative, the videos they use, The games that they put online also are much bolder, brighter, much more attractive also, and in your own language. So basically, what we are doing at the Institute for Economics and Peace, having a peace bot talking to you when you go on a website, having a positive Peace Academy online that you can follow in your own language. So when we use AI for good, well, those guys are using AI also to support their activities and be much broader, much more accessible than they were before. And you see also that the number of countries and the number of languages in which they can do that is also increasing. That's maybe a point, and that's my final slide before my propaganda slide for IEP, telling that we are an amazing think tank. So this is a slide showing you this relationship between conflict and terrorism. So we see that conflicts today are basically, once you start them, it's almost impossible to stop them. When you look at the statistics, the figures for conflict resolution in the 70s and 80s, we were at 30, 40, even more than 40% of conflicts leading to a solution, either by a victory by one of the parties or peace agreement. This is down to less than 5% today. So every conflict that is happening today is only going to get worse and last for much longer than it was before. Almost no chance for conflict resolution. So that's one thing. And then I explained to you that 98% of all casualties of all attacks occurred in countries in conflict. So when you bring both together, I think the only provision that you could do about that is that the number of conflicts is going to continue to increase, and that the impact of terrorism is also going to continue to increase, unfortunately. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you again for having me. Thank you again for always allowing the Institute for Economics and Peace to talk about this research and to set the scene for further discussion. I'm looking forward to possible questions, and thank you so much for having me again.
Dear Mr. Stroband, thank you. Thank you for your extremely valuable insights. As chair of the CCT, in the light of what we have heard from you as an expert of the field, I will ensure you that they are reflected in our future work and contribute to well-informed decisions within the committee. Thank you again. Now we are moving forward, and I would like to welcome Ms. Cecilia Polizzi with a great, enthusiasm. Founder and president of CEO of Next Wave, the International Center for Children and Global Security. Next is the first organization exclusively focused on preventing the recruitment and exploitation of children by violent extremist actors. With over 15 years of experience at the intersection of terrorism, violent extremism, and child protection, she is a leading voice in shaping global policy on youth and security. Notably, she recently published an article on youth radicalizations as a new frontier in terrorism and security, which was published in the Global Terrorism Index 2025 report. I think this is available on our desks. Is it true? Yes? That's the one we mean. It's already published in this, yes, Global Index. Dear Ms. Polizzi, thank you for, thank you for being with us. And now I would like to give the floor to you. Thanks a lot. The floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished delegates, thank you for this opportunity to address you today. I wish to extend my sincere appreciation to the Presidency of the Chamber of Deputies of the Italian Parliament, to the President of the Italian delegation, Eugenio Zoffili, and the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly for hosting this timely discussion. Today's inquiry on youth radicalization is, of course, of great importance to security within the OSCE region. Over the last few years, and even more prominently so in the last 18 months, we have witnessed a rising prominence of minors and young people in counterterrorism cases, and manifestation of youth involvement with terrorism and terrorism-related offenses have emerged consistently as a dimension of the current threat landscape. In 2024, nearly 2/3 of ISIS-linked arrests in the European Union involve teenagers. From Austria to France, from Germany to the United Kingdom, authorities have thwarted youth-planned terrorist attacks, uncovered networks of underage individuals allegedly aspiring to become ISIS martyrs, or otherwise documented an uptick in the online mobilization of minors into extremist circles, often across ideological lines. OSCE participating states and partners for cooperations have also reported cases of minors mobilizing or planning to mobilize support for radical ideologies, and showing degrees of ideological overlap between jihadism and far-right narratives. This was also an issue which was flagged by the Italian intelligence in his most recent report to the Parliament. Extremist actors across the ideological spectrum have long recruited and radicalized minors to increase their immediate operational capabilities, to ensure their survival as a movement and the preservation of their ideological paradigm over time. In conflict and near conflict zones, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and their affiliates exploit the demographic pool, systemic inequality, poverty, structural governance issue, and disenfranchisement to replenish their ranks. In fact, co-opting tens of thousands of children in terror and terror-related operations. Technological innovation, while of course, as we all know, has brought many positive transformations, have also amplified this issue beyond the geographic hotspots and provided extremist actors with efficient means to operate in complete anonymity and in a truly transnational way across a plethora of mainstream social media platforms, fringe forums, gaming environments, encrypted messaging apps, and the dark web. Extremist ideology today find fertile ground and take roots in online environments where children and young people are actively engaged and comprise, in fact, a large portion of internet and social media users. In fact, following United Nations statistics, 80% of the world children and youth may be exposed daily to violent propaganda campaigns and the risk of online radicalization by extremist actors across the spectrum. Now, this does not, of course, necessarily implies that the entirety of these demographics will ultimately fall into our core extremist forums, radicalize, join an extremist organization, or perpetrate acts of violence. However, I believe that it is our responsibility to recognize that the increased accessibility and reach of violent extremist digital content, the greater degree of vulnerability of young people to being swayed by messaging, violent propaganda, and hate-fueled belief system have both accelerated the radicalization process, which, as my colleague was already mentioning, may take place today only in a few weeks compared to the 16-month calculated back in 2022, as per former FBI Director Christopher Wray, and also rendered the digital landscape a primary vector for radicalization, recruitment, incitement to violence, otherwise mobilization of young people for terrorism purposes. The consequences of inaction in addressing the recruitment and radicalization of minors and young people are profound. Radicalized youth can pose the same credible threats as adults. They are able to produce and disseminate violent content, organize and lead networks, recruit and radicalize others, as well as carrying out attacks. Threats involving minors are also harder to detect, monitor, and disrupt than those posed by adults or individuals with a known history of violent extremism due to three primary reasons. First of all, adolescents often lack a criminal record or prior engagement with authorities, and this makes them less visible, of course, to monitoring and assessment mechanisms. Secondly, young people are generally afforded greater privacy protection under the law, which limits the scope of preventative efforts. And lastly, early signs of radicalization, such as increased isolation, secrecy, defiance, may often overlap with common developmental behaviors in adolescents, and therefore may fail to raise immediate red flags for intervention. And I think that given this scenario, it is our responsibility to acknowledge that not only the radicalization of young people and their involvement with terrorism and related offenses has the potential of undermining counterterrorism and counter-extremism efforts, but also that the capacity of minors to inflict harm, in some cases, may be greater. The risks posed by radicalized youth can, of course, be prominent in the short term, but these also extend far beyond immediate acts of violence. Their engagement with violent extremism exacerbates polarization, undermines social cohesion, jeopardizes democratic resilience, and fosters a transgenerational security challenge. And now, please, given the focus of this conference, allow me to offer a small contribution to the very thorough insights into the synergies between terrorism and organized crime that my colleagues have already put forward so excellently in previous discussions. One of the trends of the ecosystem of youth radicalization that we assist to today is represented by family units acting as a conduit in the transmission of violent ideology, capitalizing, in fact, on existing bonds of trust and personal interdependence. In its current manifestation, this issue has been firstly exposed by the foreign terrorist fighter phenomenon, as since we all know, from the outset of the Syrian crisis, thousands of minors from the European Union traveling alone or with family units have entered conflict zones in Syria and Iraq to join the caliphate, as well as other insurgent terrorist groups. And a significant parallel can be drawn here between organized crime and terrorism, where the points of comparison include the cultural and familial affiliation factors, the involvement of mafia offspring in criminal organizations, and the radicalization and participation in family terror networks of individuals underage. To conclude, the increase in radicalization among young people, along with their planning, support, and direct involvement in acts of terrorism, underscores the vulnerability of minors in this context, and how, in fact, attracting these demographic groups represent a strategic priority for terrorist and violent extremist actors. On our end, despite these systemic and integrated interventions aimed at prevention, the radicalization and disengagement are not yet a priority in our current counterterrorism strategies. And the continuation of this asymmetry risks perpetuating instability, fostering intergenerational ideological proliferation, and give rise to new waves of terrorism. And therefore, in this regard, please allow me to draw attention to the forthcoming OSCE Parliamentary Assembly resolution on preventing youth radicalization to violent extremism and terrorism through education and media and information literacy, which is in fact sponsored by Mr. Aydin, which calls for coordinated, inclusive, and evidence-based effort by all stakeholders to prevent youth radicalization. And I also wish to highlight a forthcoming decree which will be introduced by Senator Rando for the protection of minors raised in mafia-dominated environments. An initiative which, in my view, directly speaks to the need for early intervention and long-term prevention among vulnerable youth. Together, these efforts reflect the forward-looking vision, the presence, and the proactiveness of our institutions. And as Undersecretary of State Giorgio Zoffili stated yesterday, in Italy we may be known for the mafia, but we are also known for how we defeat it day after day. And so I'd really like to thank you for being here today to confront youth radicalization and terrorism with the same strength and the same determination, and for your attention. Thank you.
Dear Ms. Polizzi, thank you for sharing such valuable insights into your experience as a leading voice in shaping global policy on youth and security. Be sure that we are going too deep, to tackle with this kind of issues as a kind of national, assemblies coming from different countries, because the core causes of our CCT is to coordinate, cooperate, and share the experiences from one another. Thank you. Finally, I am honored to introduce Mr. Riccardo Pirisi, Director of the Service for Countering Extremism and External Terrorism at the Central Directorate of Prevention Police of the Italian State Police. With over 30 years of experience, he has led key investigations and high-impact operations, including the 2022 dismantling of a terrorist cell linked to one of the Charlie Hebdo attackers. Recognized for his exceptional leadership, Director Pirisi is a leading figure in Italy's counterterrorism efforts. We are delighted to welcome you here today. Please, floor is yours, sir. Thank you.
Buongiorno.
Good morning, everyone. I will also speak in Italian, not only because it's one of the official languages, but also because my English is not too great. I would like to thank MP Zoffili for organizing this exceptional conference, and I would like to thank all of you, the previous speakers, and everyone who worked on the success of this conference. And I would like to thank you not just for giving me the opportunity to be here today and to share our point of view in our daily job, but also it was a pleasure to hear other contributions, to hear data and figures that were shared, because this ties well into our work. And I'm especially glad to notice that sensitivity around this topic is increasing. As the chairman pointed out, some trends are decreasing in terrorism globally. On the other hand, there's been an exponential increase in youth engagement and minor engagement in terrorist groups. We firmly believe that police activities are the best cure at the moment, an emergency cure. And I'm glad that everyone in this room is aware of how important it is to adopt efficient cures and therapies to counter this issue. You'll probably hear me repeat some of the things that have already been said. In recent years, we have seen new trends in terrorist phenomena. They are less structured now. They used to be highly organized, perfectly planned, and they lasted longer, whereas in recent years there has been a growing number of attacks by lone actors, which prevails over other types of attacks. And especially we've noticed that lone actors are usually young people. They're very, very young, younger than what we were used to in 2010, 2015. Since the year 2000, after 9/11 and attacks in France and Spain, of course, many studies have been carried out, and I don't want to forget any of them. They're all as important. But yes, one trend has emerged. Terrorism involves people who are getting younger and younger. In 2024, 2/3 of people arrested in Europe were teenagers. In the UK, 1 in 5 terror suspects are classified as minors. Then in 2024 across Europe there were 42 arrests of young people for terrorism-related offences. This might seem like a small number, but up until a few years ago, the number was 0. So maybe, yes, we should be concerned. And Italy is not an exception. As for faith-motivated attacks, since July 2024 up until April 2025, in less than a year, we arrested 13 radical Islamonauts, among which were 4 minors. Some of them were extremely young, below the threshold of punity. And this is extremely concerning. Many of them were second or third generation immigrants, and in the meantime they had become Italian citizens, and they were all regular migrants. Then, more generally, here you can see some numbers regarding investigations involving young people. 26 search orders were carried out. Maybe these people were not arrested, or actually they were not all arrested. However, they will be subject to trial. More than 90% of these young people are below 25 years of age. As was already pointed out by previous speakers, radicalization occurs faster than before. From propaganda to proper action, the process is getting quicker and quicker in just a few weeks. That's why, as state police in Italy, we decided to face this issue with sort of an emergency treatment. When we have to deal with radicalized minors, we cannot carry out investigation as provided for by manuals. We need to step in as soon as possible in order to disrupt their attempts. And then these young people should not only be subject to repression programs, but also integration, re-education programs. We lack a legislative framework for this specific case. However, thanks to the prosecutors' offices and different surveillance bodies, judicial bodies, local bodies, and other actors involved, we are somehow able to create some multi-agency cooperation initiatives to handle this issue. And coming back to the main topic, there are risk factors and vulnerability factors that simplify the whole investigation process. Some suspects are of Muslim faith, or they converted to Islam. And I would like to point out that this is not an actual Islamic faith. It's a deviated form of Islamic faith. And then it interlaps with other vulnerability factors, such as immaturity, because these people are teenagers. They're very young. In some cases, everything overlaps with low social integration, which affects young Italian people as well, that were also persecuted and sanctioned. And this point was already raised by previous speakers. There is a sort of a general fascination for violence today. This was also pointed out by previous speakers. Propaganda plays a key role on social media platforms, on gaming platforms. I do not want to blame anyone specifically, but Minecraft, for example, is present on all devices that we analyze at the judiciary police. So we really are aware that this is a possible vector. After the 7th of October 2023, there has been an incremental rise of anti-Semitism trends, which exacerbate the issue and possible reactions. I said that the role of social networks and messaging apps is key in radicalization processes. At the moment, we do not have tools at our disposal that can act in a targeted way. Big techs can help mitigate the risk of radicalization of users. And this can be a great tool. But I would like to take a step back. The fascination for violence is an expression of the nexus that leads young people to violence. In all cases, we observed a very limited ideological basis in the training of these radicalized teenagers. At some point, we also realized that in some contexts there was no ideology at all, especially as for the Madrid group. Some speakers who took the floor asked a question: can we still talk of terrorism when in some countries there is an ideological basis supporting criminal actions, whereas in other cases there is no ideology at all? There is just a fascination for violence. In fact, this kind of hybridization is evident when we observe not faith-related terrorism, but rather far-right supremacism through contamination with Islamist radical ideologies. We have so-called white jihad. In these cases, by analyzing seized devices, we usually find Nazi ideologies, of course, but then we find infographics from the Islamic State, videos of beheadings, of killings, of drills where arms and explosives are used. This is what we find in their devices. This is also a sign of anti-Zionist perspective. This is what we find on the devices, and they all contribute to the radicalization process. Then let's look at data and statistics on white jihad. In Italy, numbers are much higher, almost double, than what we've seen for faith-related terrorism. 25 arrests, 35 arrests, but 90% of them were below 25 years of age, and then so many more individuals were searched to gather evidence. Maybe it might be a bit complex for you to understand this mechanism. I don't know if in your own country this follows the same path, but if you do know the Italian legal system, you know that, yes, we can search hundreds of suspects in this specific field. And just to be clear, as I've already said earlier on, there are some convergences between accelerationism and jihadism. This is a sort of hybridization, and the convergences are the use of the net, the terrorist aim, as well as the combination of violent content from different narratives and ideologies. I've also said that we adopted an immediate intervention strategy to prevent young people from carrying on their radicalization process and get to a planning or execution phase. Or if they carry on, they could involve more and more people in their network. So how do we intervene? Well, international cooperation is key. It was also mentioned by MP Loperfido. He was urging for an increased cooperation between these organizations. They already do cooperate a lot, but more could be done, especially in biometric data sharing and in harmonizing legislative frameworks at EU level, just to avoid different sanctions in different countries. Then, of course, monitoring virtual environments is another key tool at our disposal. We especially rely on virtual human intelligence. A completely virtual intelligence is complex in this case, because there are not many subjects that speak the same language and they do not share the same culture as our targets. We are also making progress on this front. Among Italian citizens joining the police force, there are some Arab-speaking colleagues. Their number is increasing, and we hope they will be able to put their skills to good use, because it's really hard to find reliable interpreters. So it's absolutely necessary. Undercover activities, when it comes to minors who are extremely vulnerable, are quite risky. We really need to find a balance in interacting with these individuals. We should not, in fact, be the ones who push them to an ever stronger violent radicalization. Other contrast, or rather counterterrorism methods we have in Italy, are expulsions, both on the administrative and judicial level. Individuals can be expelled from national territory on grounds of social or national security. Then another tool is the entry ban in the Schengen area. I'm sure you all know it. However, this entry ban cannot apply to EU citizens. And in most cases, our targets are EU citizens. They have double citizenship, and usually they have an Italian citizenship as well. That's why expelling them gets harder. Then we have prevention measures. They were taken from the anti-mafia code. When we can't rely on judicial tools, or when we can't expel individuals from the national territory, when we cannot expel suspects, then we can rely on these tools to monitor them as closely as possible. Social costs are extremely high. And these people are very young, so our costs are long-term investments, so to say. We cannot act in any other way. We need to repress, but we also need to carry out preventive programs with all bodies involved: the Ministry of Interior, police forces, intelligence agencies, as well as the Department of Prison Administration, all judicial bodies, especially the juvenile court, local bodies, social services, and then school and education. All projects must bring together all these bodies and they need to come up with disengagement and rehabilitation programs for the youth. I belong to the police forces, so I'm thinking about my role and my mandate, but in the last few years, this trend has increased, and personally, I believe that, as other speakers have said, we should start from education. Not just for young people, but for families as well. We've talked of media literacy, information literacy. Yes, absolutely yes. When we search the houses of suspects, families have no idea what their children are doing. Families cannot use online platforms. They are not aware of what their children might come in contact to online. Some families can't even detect actual signs of radicalization that these young people have in their rooms. They are all surprised and taken aback. And when they actually understand what's going on, they're traumatized, and their families also need to be helped and supported. In our society, parents usually work long hours. They're outside the home for the whole day. That's why the school system must be involved. And most times teachers do tell us, in hindsight, they tell us, yes, that's true, that boy was always alone, he was always stuck to his phone, he never spent time with his classmates because he thought they were inferior. And we're usually speaking of boys, but they always tell us when it's too late, afterwards. So that's why we're trying to come out of our shell and to get into contact with juvenile courts, for example, or prosecutors' offices. We engaged with them, and now they are more and more aware that it's their issue as well. They have tools at their disposal to support families and suspects in their de-radicalization process. However, the means are limited, and we are planning on engaging with the school system more and more. That's why I urge all decision makers who are here today, please spread awareness with schools and education bodies when it comes to bullying, revenge porn. We need to involve all relevant bodies, and our organizations can provide training on this issue. Sorry for taking too long, and I'm here and I'm available to answer your questions.
Dear Mr. Polizzi, thank you for providing these valuable insights from your outstanding professional experience. The work carried by the Italian authorities in this context is impressive. And we all much to learn from you. Many thanks again to all our experts for their enlightening remarks, which surely triggered our interest and hopefully paved the way to an intriguing debate. But before just opening the floor for the debate, democratically I am taking the floor, giving the priority to myself and making a very brief comment about the things we have heard so far and the experiences we obtained in our CCT activities. Since the beginning of the activities under the umbrella of CCT, which was founded in 2017, we organized some, activities, and we participated in some activities organized by some other organizations or co-organized together. And honestly, we learned lessons, because in order to combat professionally against the terrorism, we should learn how to combat. So combating terrorism on the field honestly, is so simple. We can manage, but it is not the end of the story, I think. Because, unfortunately, the terrorist groups or organized crime groups are so professional in devilishly transforming themselves into other manifestations or forms. So, all throughout the history of terrorism, yes, we learned many things. Because, for example, they misused, they exploited religion, they misused ideologies, they exploited and misused technological developments so far. Why? In order to create a kind of chaos among the society. Because we valued all these things. We valued religions, we valued technological developments, we give very significance, to the developments. And then, as a result of this, misuse of these values, honestly, they exploited people and they created a great chaos. And now they targeted a new, very pure, naive, romantic area, which are our children, by radicalizing them. And sometimes we feel, very weak, because we cannot how to combat against this kind of new, let's say, transformations. And I did want to make this comment, and I hope that you will share with me all these things. And from now on, we are going to focus SCCT, for example. That's why we prepared a kind of report. And we are going to focus on the education of the youth without disturbing them, without, just breaking their hearts. And I hope we can manage with the help of these expertise. Thank you very much. And now I would like to open the floor for comments and questions from our CCT members and participants. Please remember to introduce yourself and your institution, nationality, as you begin, and kindly limit your remarks to 3 minutes, as far as I know, to allow time for the comprehensive discussion, because we have got a very long list. And soon after, we are going to move on to closing remarks, because Mr. Zoffili is just staring at me that, please be on time then. See, thank you. And the floor is open. And the first question, Ms. Pevoric from Montenegro. She has got an excuse, I think. She's going to leave earlier. Thank you.
Yes.
The floor is yours, madam.
Thank you, dear Mr. Aydin. Someone could say that you are a little bit biased because I'm speaking first because I'm in CCT. And thank you for your presentations. And in that light, I really remain personally still deeply impacted by our recent visit to the United States. And during this mission, we engaged with some of the US leading experts on terrorism, radicalization, and extremism, as you could hear. And perhaps most disturbing was the data showing that children as young as 12, 13, 14 are being targeted by extremist content online. There was even cases of just 8 years old. This is a horrifying reality and not a distant one. It is happening now and it is growing. And the main question to ensure is how to ensure safety and security for our children and for our societies. Also, we all were very worried when we discussed about the incident that happened on 26 February this year, and a so-called Instagram attack. And that is something that really opened our eyes, and maybe for the first time we actually realized how dangerous that can be, and that our children are not protected even in our houses, in their rooms and in our living rooms. Of course, this is not just a security issue. It's a social, moral, and generational challenge. If we fail to act now, we risk not only public safety, but the trust and future of very societies we represent. Also, we have to think what we can do. Firstly, we have to update national counterterrorism strategies to include digital literacy, early prevention, and target intervention for youth. Secondly, engage schools, parents, educators, and youth leaders as frontline definers. And third, foster cross-border cooperation to track, counter, and fight online recruitment networks, because radicalization does not stop at national borders. And finally, as parliamentarians and policymakers, we must ask how we can protect our children. And I believe that this is our mission, our group as CCT, but in also OSCE in general. And thank you once again, grazie mille for your hospitality, and happy holiday to everyone who is celebrating. Thank you.
Thank you. And the second one is from Belgium, Mr. Slagholder. Please, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, the radicalization of young people into violent extremism is today one of the most serious threats to our security and society. This threat manifests itself daily in our cities, in online environments, and in prisons. We must have the courage to recognize that one ideological movement is particularly very active today in recruiting and mobilizing youth, and that's Islamist violent extremism. This is not a matter of religion, but of political indoctrination disguised as faith. It is essential to make a clear distinction between Islamist violent extremism and, for example, right or left radical language, radical views that advocate fundamental change can be legitimated in a democratic system as long as they respect the rule of law and reject violence. These environments create fertile grounds for Islamistic extremism, which is fueled by the lack of borders, failed integration, and an ideological climate where Islamist extremism has too often been tolerated under the banner of diversity. At the same time, we see how digital radicalization is increasing. Social media, encrypted communication, and even AI are being used by extremists to target young people. Our security services are still insufficiently equipped to deal with this reality. We also see that criminals are able to cooperate more effectively than our security services. Finally, it is crucial that international organizations like the OSCE have the courage to call things by their name. Vague terminology helps no one. An effective response begins with honest analysis, not with appeasement. Islamism and Islamic terrorism are increasingly manifesting among young people. Terrorist groups and criminal gangs deliberately target minors, knowing that they are less likely to face severe consequences from the authorities due to their age. Young people deserve protection from radical preachers, from online hatred, but also from policies that look the other way instead of taking action. And therefore, we must strengthen the capacity of our security services to monitor and counter online radicalization, especially through encrypted channels and emerging technologies such as AI. Second, we must take firm action against so-called safe havens for jihadists in our cities and protect our borders much better than now. And third, we should strengthen education in democratic values, critical thinking, and digital literacy to make young people more resilient. Thank you.
Thank you. And the third one, Mr. Halkashvili from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for moderating this very interesting panel, and to all the experts for expressing their expert opinions on this important issue. Mr. Strubans, Serge, I wanted to start with the results of last year of this global terrorism index. But luckily, or fortunately, Georgia is green again in this one. So, thank you for that. But it's not just luck that Georgia is green here. Of course, it's not just luck, especially having very difficult regions around, all those hotspots around Georgia. So Georgia sits, much like some of our neighbors, Georgia sits in between of these very difficult, complex regions. But I would say there are three reasons why Georgia is green for several years already without any terrorist incident reported. First one is obviously the legal and policy framework for combating terrorism. Second one is the institutions that must be effective, capable of doing things, including Georgia State Security Service. And the third one is the social integration programs, so to say, because we are talking a lot about punitive action, but my question would be also, what are non-punitive actions that we can really deploy to avoid, to mitigate the terrorism threats? Because it has been a tendency to talk about punitive actions, to fight, to kill, to avoid, to expel, and so on and so on. But what really matters in these times, to our mind and based on the Georgian experience, is non-punitive action. Be it economic development, be it community-based programs, be it literacy that Mr. Chair, Mr. Aydin also highlighted. So these are some of the modern approaches, I would say, that are important. And finally, obviously, terrorism is not a static phenomenon. It's changing all the time, constantly evolving, constantly adapting to new realities. Therefore, international cooperation is important because it doesn't have, it's kind of umbrella for all the activities or the pillars that you may do, because terrorism does not have any religion, any language, any nothing. But terrorism always takes roots where vigilance waits and the unity is broken. Therefore, international cooperation is important. Georgia has been a reliable partner, and we would love to share these good and bad experiences, and we would love to share your experiences in this regard as well, to make sure that the terrorist doesn't have any fertile ground in our societies. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your comment. And the fourth one is coming from Algeria. Mr. Berbera, the floor is yours, sir.
زميلاتي زملائي نواب الجمعية البرلمانية لمنظمة الأمن والتعاون في أوروبا، الحضور الكريم، السلام عليكم. أود أن أتقدم بجزيل الشكر إلى البرلمان الإيطالي على حسن الاستقبال وكرم الضيافة في هذه الكلمة.
Can you start from the beginning again, because we are going to mute into the channel. Yes, translation channel.
زملائي نواب الجمعية البرلمانية لمنظمة
Does everybody tuned in? Do you have translation now? No.
Some? No. Yes.
Wait a few seconds, please.
Okay, now everything works. Ladies and gentlemen, dear MPs, dear guests, thank you everyone. First of all, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to the Italian Parliament for the warm welcome. And here's my question, my contribution. I would like to talk more about the Algerian approach to violent extremism and terrorism. Dear guests, Algeria was one of the first countries to understand the threat of barbarian terrorism and violent terrorism that could undermine the state and its democratic pillars. And Algeria was able, thanks to the dedication of its people and thanks to the efforts made by the institutions and by the popular army, Algeria was able to thwart threats to its unity and its territory. In the 90s, Algeria faced the threat of terrorism and violence and was able to defeat them with no international help. And thanks to our integrated approach with legislative actions as well, with new bills, new laws adopted, and a law on reconciliation approved by an absolute majority, we were able to further tackle the issue. Then Algeria adopted a moderate religious dialogue based on pacific coexistence. We refuse every type of extremism, and the 90s were a very bloody decade, but now Algeria is ahead of the curve in the fight against terrorism, and it has become a regional and international model in facing this transnational phenomenon. Algeria has signed all international conventions against terrorism, among which the one on the criminalization of paying ransom to armed groups. And today Algeria is deeply engaged in support efforts to neighboring African countries in supporting counter-terrorism efforts. And I cannot but welcome all efforts made by my country to bolster international cooperation in the fight against terrorism. Especially, I would like to commend the initiative by the President of the Republic, Al-Mahij Tebboune, as coordinator of the African Union for the prevention of terrorism and violent extremism. This initiative aims at introducing a new framework for international efforts against terrorism, especially in the Sahel region. My country has really made a difference in counterterrorism efforts recently. The Security Council of the UN has adopted Algerian guidelines on terrorism financing through modern technology. This is a pivotal time, a turning point for international security. Algeria, thanks to its experience and in-depth knowledge of the issue, firmly believes that terrorist group actives in the Sahel regions are supported by foreign actors. Algeria was able to contribute efficiently to reaching a series of goals with very efficient mechanisms at regional level in order to counter terrorism and violent extremism. For example, we established a group within the armed forces to combat terrorism in the region, as well as the coordination and communication unit to better identify terrorism trends. And then we created an association of researchers on terrorism with headquarters in Algeria. Algeria refuses every compromise because it was one of the first countries to suffer the consequences of terrorism, and we faced it alone at a time when regional, international, political contexts were still hesitant. That's why we have to adopt strict rules to combat terrorism. We need to cut all financing for terrorism, and we need the support of the international community to bolster regional efforts in Africa. And we should not forget that the security environment is very complex at the moment. Our international partners can provide platforms to combat terrorism in other countries as well.
From Turkey. Now, Çelik is yours. Floor is yours then.
Sayın Başkan, çok teşekkür ediyorum. Konuşmacılardan Serge Strobans'a bir sorum olacak. Konuşmanızda Okay.
Can you hear? No, not yet.
Can you hear me now? You can hear me now. Okay, perfect. I have a question for Mr. Strobans. In your speech, you mentioned Israel among the countries who has been a country targeted by terrorist attacks, but you didn't mention the terrorist attacks which have been realized, put into action by Israel in Palestine. Palestine and the Gaza Strip has become an open-air cemetery, and the entire world is watching. So I would just like to underline why the exclusion of the Israeli-fed terrorist attacks.
Thanks very much, Sean Crowe. As you say, I'm from Ireland. Just to, I think it was very interesting this morning. It's a very complex issue. We heard yesterday there's no definition agreed of what is terrorism. The famous expression, one man's terrorist, another man's freedom fighter. But I think for most of us, we can differentiate, what is terrorism. The last speaker talked in terms of, what's happening in Gaza, and again, I think it's incumbent on us all to just reflect on what's happening there. I would see that as very much as state terrorism. In some countries, I can't actually say that. I'd be accused of being anti-Semitic. They're using starvation as a weapon. There's a deliberate targeting of journalists, hospitals, attacks on first responders, ambulances, and this is all happening. So there's a lot of hypocrisy around the issue of what is terrorism and what isn't. I was really disappointed to hear about the figures that was given in relation to conflict resolution. And I'm just conscious of our own peace process and the role of outside actors involved in that. There was people from the US, Canada, Finland, South Africa, and without those outside actors, we wouldn't have had a peace process. So I think it's really important that we try and support all those countries that are involved in trying to bring about peaceful resolutions to long conflicts. So, again, if you look at countries that are trying to do that, I'm conscious that one of the countries that is named as supposedly supporting terrorism would be Cuba. And the reason in recent years that Cuba has been on that list is because they hosted discussions between the Colombian government, the FARC rebel and the ELN group, which brought about, to a large extent, transformation in Colombia, but yet they are still on a list of the countries supporting terrorism. So again, as I said at the start, there's a lot of hypocrisy involved in this issue, but I'd be just interested in the view of the panel in relation to those countries. How do we reach out? How do we encourage those countries that are so transformative by their work in bringing about conflict resolutions in hotspots around the world?
Thank you. And we have already closed the list because we are running out of time. Otherwise, we cannot spare any time for the guests, speakers, experts. And now the floor is given to Mr. Guliev from Azerbaijan.
Thank you very much, dear Aydin, Kamil, and dear colleagues. I'm from Azerbaijan and a member of Parliament and the OSCE delegation. The reason that I asked for the floor is just to express my support, Mr. Kamil, for your initiative drafting the supplementary item on youth radicalization, preventing youth radicalization. And this is really a very timely approach, a very timely initiative, because we all know that in many countries, these phenomena are becoming more and more dangerous. Even I would like to just focus on one specific issue, which is very radical and very dangerous for the society, that in some of our member countries, the trend of carrying knife and using them also being bullied and also harassed. This is something that we need to very, very carefully deal with. This is why I think if you look at the reason why it is happening, maybe one of the reasons is the lack of the parental supervision, or they're abusing the online. You know that in some of the countries, the radicalization or the criminal behavior of some youth are being even glorified. So, and another reason might be the less of the lack of sentencing, or the under-policing or over-tolerating this type of actions and behavior. This is why I think the OSCE must really focus on that issue. I do believe that we will have a debate in Porto to adopt this timely drafted supplementary item. And another reason that I wanted to take the floor is to express my support to the Syrian government, because you know that Syria has been an area for many years of radicalization and the terrorist organization. Now it is a historic chance for Syrian people and for the entire international community to restore peace and the security there, and to prevent any kind of lesser trend coming from different radical, let's say, organizations. This is why this is a timely approach to lift all the sanctions on Syria, on Syrian government. I think OSCE member countries and all of us have to work on that issue, and of course to express our solidarity with the people of Syria. Thank you.
Thank you, Azai. And now the floor is given to Mr. Hajiani from Cyprus. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Kamil, and congratulate for your excellent work as a committee, as Ad Hoc Committee, but also during this event here. I will try to be very, very brief, and I want to stress actually the importance for the inter-religion dialogue. This dimension, of course, countering terrorism is multiple phenomena, very difficult. Many dimensions are there. And from this point of view, I want to stress the importance of the inter-religion dialogue. So it means that we have to hear a strong voice from the church, from all the religions, and especially also from the administrations of all the religions, that they are not able to accept terrorism as an instrument improving or pushing their religion. I don't speak about the Evangelium, I don't speak about Sharia, I don't speak about Buddha, etc., but it is necessary to have a strong voice from aspect of, from point of view of the church, that terrorism is not an instrument pushing the religion. For this reason, I need to stress also the need from our Parliamentary Assembly, maybe in the frame of your resolution, to include also the importance of the inter-religion dialogue, and to say very strong against the voice using either aspects of the spirit of the religions in favor of countering, of improving, of using terrorism. Thank you very much.
Thank you. What a great coincidence, Mr. Hajiani, because in winter conference we are planning that kind of item to discuss. Yes, among the religions and different perspectives, of course, to combat against terrorism. Thank you. And the floor is given to Mr. Dalkılıç from Turkey.
Sayın Başkan, değerli meslektaşlarım.
Dear President, dear colleagues, I would also like to thank you. Dear President, dear colleagues, I would also start my intervention by thanking you. Dear President, dear colleagues, I'll thank you. Of course, we should be very determined in the fight against terrorism, which is a constant threat against stability and against all forms of human life. I would also like to thank the Italian delegation in the person of the President Eugenio Zoffili. Many of the guests today, they spoke of Islamic terrorism. We believe that Islam is not a perpetrator of terrorism, and we believe that there should not be any classification of terrorism as Islamic matrix terrorism or Islamic generated terrorism. We believe that we should stand very firmly, very determinedly against terrorism. As Turkey, we have always condemned and always fought against all forms of terrorist activities without any distinction and without any classification of their country or their ideological religious origin. My dear colleague, my Belgian colleague, Christophe, if I'm not mistaken, he also mentioned Islam originated or extremist Islamic originated terrorism. That's what I would like to stress once again, that Islam or any religion should not be mentioned side by side by any kind of terrorism, but we should speak of terrorism, of course. Especially in the Middle East, especially in some of the regions, some of the organizations, terrorist organizations, have benefited majorly from supports from other international actors, and we should be very careful before mentioning Islamic terrorist state or Islamic terrorist activities. We should be well aware of the mechanisms of support that they receive and of the interests that they defend of other large actors. And again, not mentioning and being silent in front of a crime of terrorist activities perpetrated by a state which has been invading, killing, and realizing terrorist activities, condemning a people to death of starvation, classifying them as terrorist population, as an entire population, targeting children, fragile groups, women, and bombing hospitals and streets and devastating cities. This is a silence that we condemn, and this is a silence that we do not accept. We are against, as Turkey, in our region, in the world, in the entire universe, for peace and for stability. We are involved, profoundly involved, in a determined fight, in a convinced fight in all forms and all regions and manifestations of terrorism. And thank you very much to this committee and to all members of the parliament.
Am I right?
Near enough. Thank you. So I'd just like to start by thanking all the people who contributed here this morning, particularly our experts. It's been a very enjoyable and interesting conversation. And I'd like to start by just paring this back to our youth. We must really remember that our youth, wherever they're from, are all trying to find themselves. Many feel inadequate, they don't feel enough. There's major inferiority complexes going on. So I think we have to remember that. And I think as in a medical problem, with problems with the youth, early intervention is very important. So I would love to see something going forward that in every country that the services of youth and children are improved, and I think that would help going forward. So right-wing ideology, violent right-wing extremism and jihadi extremism have not traditionally featured very significantly in Ireland, thank God, so far. However, the COVID pandemic created a space for right-wing extremists to exploit for the purposes of spreading their narratives online. They have continued to do so in relation to issues such as the conflict in Ukraine, the cost of living crisis, LGBTQ issues, and immigration. This has led to an upsurge in anti-establishment sentiment and hate speech online, particularly in the youth. This sentiment has resulted in threats of violence to establishment figures and damage being caused to infrastructure, and there is a concern that it may lead to further violent attacks. Given the scale of this issue and the use of private platforms, the Garda Síochána have indicated that investigators in Ireland have experienced difficulties in detecting extremists online. We have some evidence that the online activities of extremists are manifesting offline and in the real world. This has mainly been in the form of anti-establishment, anti-government, anti-immigrant protests, and once they move offline, it's very hard to detect what's happening. And I suppose my question is two really. Any advice from countries maybe where this is more of a problem of how we can prevent it getting worse in Ireland? And is there anything we in this forum can do in a cross-country international way to help our youth just to get in early and give them the security to feel secure in themselves and no need to get involved in anything that untoward? Thank you.
Thank you. Now, we are running out of time. That's why we limited the time for the rest of the group for 1 minute. And now the floor is given to Tekbak from Algeria. Mr. Tekbak, the floor is yours.
Monsieur le Président, chers collègues parlementaires, distingués invités, je tiens en ce jour sacré pour nous les musulmans et je profite de cette occasion pour... Alors, il n'y a pas de traduction, quoi.
Non.
Alors, je fais mon allocution et pour ceux qui comprennent, bon, pour le reste, c'est dommage.
Just a minute. Yeah.
Non, c'est une intervention.
Yes. So French is not included into the, translation.
On le fait pas? Il y a des gens qui comprennent, non?
Oui, oui. Oui.
Alors,
Hein?
c'est un message qu'on doit transmettre au nom de l'Algérie.
Yeah.
Alors, ceux qui comprennent, expliquent
problem.
aux autres, ou bien traduisent aux autres. Voilà.
Yes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Marco can
Alors, je recommence. Je dis, Monsieur le Président, chers collègues parlementaires, distingués invités, je tiens en ce jour sacré pour nous, les musulmans, et je profite de cette occasion pour féliciter tout le monde musulman et surtout le peuple algérien à l'occasion de l'Aïd. Et nous leur souhaitons plus de bonheur et de prospérité. Je souligne ici nos frères et sœurs et enfants à Gaza, en Palestine, qui continuent à souffrir le martyre. Et puis je tiens à attirer votre attention, Monsieur le Président, que nous avons quitté nos familles en ce jour sacré pour vous faire part de notre expérience en Algérie. Alors donnez-nous du temps, ou bien le temps nécessaire pour le faire correctement et efficacement. Je dis, alors que nous affrontons collectivement les métamorphoses d'un monde en crise, crise des valeurs, crise du lien social, crise de sens, un phénomène inquiétant se propage dans l'ombre. L'enrôlement d'une partie de notre jeunesse dans les idéologies de la haine, de la rupture et de la violence. Le terrorisme ne frappe plus uniquement par des actes spectaculaires. Il infiltre les esprits, colonise les émotions et manipule les frustrations d'une jeunesse en quête d'appartenance et de reconnaissance. Face à cette menace insidieuse, nos parlements ont le devoir de comprendre, prévenir et agir, car il ne s'agit pas plus seulement de sécurité nationale, mais de préserver le contrat social et l'avenir même de nos sociétés. Aujourd'hui, les jeunes sont confrontés à une pluralité de discours radicaux qui exploitent le vide existentiel causé par la marginalisation sociale, l'absence de perspectives professionnelles ou encore la perte de repères culturels et spirituels. L'environnement numérique où des groupes extrémistes investissent massivement les réseaux sociaux, les formes cryptées et les jeux en ligne pour diffuser leur idéologie, souvent sous forme séduisante et simplifiée. Alors,
merci beaucoup.
Je vous en prie.
Thank you.
Allez.
Now the floor is, how many left? Yes, the floor is given to the Spanish delegate. But you promised that you are going to keep it very short.
Don't worry, Mr. President. Thank you very much for giving me the floor, even if I am not in the list. Just for a question to Mr. Ricardo Perisi. I would like to know more, if possible, about the impact of the Israeli genocide in Gaza against Palestinians in the radicalization of European and Italian youth people. I would like very much, if it's possible, to give us more information, surveys, or all information you are able to share today. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. And last but not the least, Mr. Lahat, are you ready then to take the floor? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the contributors. Just very briefly, I think over the 2 days, a summary of our proceedings might be in one sentence, is that many of the threats that we face nowadays are invisible, that they are unseen. But some actions in the world and some actors in the world are very visible. And while I express my appreciation to Mr. Strubans for the Global Terrorism Index briefing for 2025, I would ask the question, and I'm echoing what one of my colleagues has spoken about, and also the previous Spanish speaker. I think a useful index for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe is, where are people terrified in the world? In what countries do people live in terror? Because there are state actors who create terror, and these are not mentioned at all in the global index of terrorism briefing that we received today. So I think that is something that we can look at. There are women and children who are terrorized by the actions of states. Gaza has been mentioned. There are other places, like Sudan, Yemen, in the world. So that global terrorism index, I would like to see an index of where people live in fear in the world, because, and one final point I would say, I would disagree with the suggestion that all youth terrorism and radicalization comes from nothing. You know, there generally tends to be a cause for how young people react. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. And a few final words we are expecting from, yes, from Ferrero. Julia.
Yes, Julia Ferraro from Agency from Peace Building. I want to thank you for the conversation and from bringing forward the element of cooperation and coordination from a perspective of somebody working in the field, from the NGO and Think and Do Tank perspective. I think it's very important that we make sure that the policy work is aligned with the field work and the way around. And my reflection and input, it will be that radicalization doesn't follow a single script. And so we have heard this, even compared to yesterday and today, that each context have different driver, platform, and narratives. And I think it's important that we remember that when we work to build preventive strategies to prevent and counter violent extremism, we do it in a way that takes into account the community. So we work with the community that we aim and target, and not only for the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Julia. And finally, I would like to give the floor back to the panelists, to the keynote speakers. And if they mind, please, would you limit yourself for 2 or 3 minutes? Yes, Julia. Ricardo Perisi, the floor is yours.
Grazie.
Thank you. I would like to answer to the question of the Spanish MP. If we're talking about the Italian scenario, at the moment we've not observed any attack that is connected to what's going on in the Gaza Strip. Certainly, there is rising discomfort, there are more protests in the far left, but we've not observed any terrorist attack in a proper sense. I cannot provide precise figures, but I remember about 10 episodes around Europe, in France, Germany, Denmark, Sweden. These actions targeted Jew individuals or individuals related to Israel, and I think this might be caused by what's going on in the Gaza Strip. There may have been some interference by state actors that have used proxies, and proxies are usually young people who were fascinated by violence in order to commit violent actions. They were not high-level actions, but we have observed them. Some of the countries who are attending here today will be aware of what I'm talking about. I cannot provide precise figures, but of course there is a rising anti-Zionist sentiment, anti-Semitic sentiment. We've seen some occurrences in Europe as well in the last few months, at least 10 episodes. Maybe some of the MPs who are here today might be able to confirm what I'm saying. Thank you.
Ms. Polizzi, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to answer to the Irish delegate who put forward a question with respect to any advice that we may have when it comes to preventative efforts, especially along the trajectory of online radicalization of minors. And I believe that, of course, the fact that now minors can be and are, as we know, radicalized online creates adds a new layer of complexity to radicalization and the involvement of minors in terrorism as a phenomenology in general. And of course, we are now assisting to an environment where we have an hybridization of ideologies that we also, as experts, have difficulties in recognizing, pin it, label it, and therefore also removing content, as this has, of course, been one of the major preventive strategies being implemented by several states. And with this being said, in my view, after all of these years researching this topic, it is my true conviction that the real answer here always resides with our capacity to raise awareness. Of course, this is not only in policy circles, and follow up with appropriate frameworks, legislations, and instruments that may in fact serve as to prevent and address this phenomenon comprehensively. And in addition to that, I also like to underline that we need to do much more systemically to inform the minors themselves that there are risks online when they approach the internet, social media, etc., and that they may not be aware of. And conjunctly with that, I also think that we should be dedicating more efforts into systemic education, critical thinking, and resilience. So even in those circumstances where the violent messages and the propaganda and even some of those actors who we know are in fact online grooming the minors may take place, the minors as the right instruments not to fall prey of these groups. Because when that happens, the minors is already at the end of a radicalization trajectory, and therefore I believe that the time frame for action is then much shorter. and with all the complication, of course, that this creates for the minors himself or herself, and for society as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you. Now the final, yes, floor is given to Serge, because Serge, I think, is going to answer some questions as well.
Yeah,
yes,
I'll try.
The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you
yes.
so much. I'm not going to answer individual questions, but rather give more context to it. I think in my presentation I spoke about reducing the impact and increasing the stability and resilience of our societies. I think that's very important. We need to have a combination of the security effort, but also the transformation of our society. I think somebody spoke about taking away the fertile ground, taking away the fertile soil for radicalization, recruitment, and violent extremism. I think, of course, there should be a coordination between policymakers, legislators, and schools, parents, education. But I think it's very difficult to do that in our current societies, especially in Europe, which are not focusing on security as much as they should do. And therefore, policy in other fields are not taking security into the conception of what is written in those policies also. So you need to understand that a lot of things happening in, I would say, socioeconomic factors, socioeconomic indicators, have a consequence in, I would say, on the security field. So you need to bring that into your reflection also. And not only schools, education comes from home and school. And so you need to make sure that you also give the opportunity to families, to parents, to do their role as a parent, and that's basically what you need to do to make sure that your kids can grow up in a very positive environment. And I know it's not always possible, it's not always, can be difficult, but that's where the policy and legislation should go to. We of course see blurred lines between I would say external and internal security. Everything which is happening on the global scale has repercussion in our own societies. We have seen over the past year, and especially after October 7th, that the percentage of anti-Semitist acts has grown by 270% and Islamophobic acts by 220%. And that's definitely in our societies and worldwide also. When we look at the different forms of terrorism, and during the COVID pandemic, every form of terrorism and every political ideology took advantage of what was happening down there. We can clearly see, and I do agree with some of the comments that were put forward. I don't like this dichotomy between political motivation and religious motivations. I think we need to understand that we cannot talk about Islam as being the motor of terrorism, but we need to look at a perverted ideology that is basically abused within Islam, that is used to justify the use of violence, as well as it is done on the political side also. And when we look at the figures, we of course see that the political motivation in Europe is basically 3 times higher than the religiously motivated, which I really think is the wrong way to approach it, but that's what has been decided internationally. Political forms are three times more important than the religious forms, but therefore when you look at the longer period of time with the number of casualties, it's pretty clear that this Islamist form of terrorism has generated much more casualties also, and depending on the country you live in, or your political, I would say, vision of the world, you would either use the numbers of attacks or the number of casualties, feeding your own agenda or feeding what's really happening in your country and the potential political forces emerging and how you can basically force them. I think we need to understand the process of radicalization, this pyramid of radicalization. We're basically in the lower green parts, you find the entire society. Some of them would basically frustrate. We all frustrate. In Belgium, we're really good at that, and giving comments also. Some will then become activists, and then from there, when you frustrate from trying to make a difference and you cannot make a difference, basically you come close to this idea, or maybe I should use violence to do that, or you come close to being approached by recruiters, which will then actively radicalize you. And I think the duty of you as legislators, but also the executive part, or government, is make sure to keep, by creating a more stable and resilient society, is to keep the maximum of people, basically everybody in our societies, in the lower green layers. That's the role of policymakers and legislators. Yeah, I mean, of course, when we talk about this and we talk about Gaza and Israel, I'm not going to take a political stance in that. I'm not going to share my opinion on what's happening down there. We are measuring political terror as one of the indicators in our global peace next, which is going to be released in about 10 days from now. It's going to be presented here in Rome on the 25th of June also. So we measure forms of terrorism. And I think we need to be very careful. Then again, I don't want to go into a class on definition of terrorism, but there is a definite difference between terror and terrorism. Those are two different concepts. And terror is related more to the French Revolution, la terreur, Robespierre, these kind of things, while terrorism is a political act where violence or the fear of violence is used. Of course, illegal use of violence is used against an indiscriminate group of people to generate, to start a negotiation, a dialogue with the political, I would say, government in place. It is part of an insurgency. That's why we see the connection with conflict also. But we need to be very careful in the terms we use and how we approach this. And of course, state terrorism is something which exists. But where is the database? Which country is really going to put its figures forward about state-sponsored terrorism, the type of proxies they are promoting? So we need to find ways to also look at the effects of this state-sponsored terrorism, kind of the type and the number of casualties they produce, but also making sure that we understand the processes that are lying behind all this. And I think, yeah, maybe I should stop here. But I think my key message is reduce the impact and increase the stability and the resilience of your societies, and you will start solving problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Serge. Thank you. You know, before closing this session, I would like to make my final comment in the light of all these I have heard so far. I think we should stand strong and sturdy against, you know, any anti-Semitic, anti-Christ, or anti-Islamic rhetoric or manifestation that the terrorist groups, organizations, or wish us to do that. Why? Because we are fed up. We have enough. We learned a lot. We are fed up with crusades. We are fed up with world wars. We are fed up with bloodshed. And this is my, you know, final comment. And I would like to thank all of you and our keynote speakers in particular for their valuable contributions and insights. Then yes, the final, yeah. I think this has been an enriching exchange, which has made me think further about what more we as parliamentarians should do to protect our citizens from the scourge of violence and terrorism. As a very first step, I encourage you all to unanimously support our Porto resolution on preventing youth radicalization to violent extremism. And now I am giving the floor to my friend as the host of this session to give the final words and say thank you then. Thank you. Emmanuel, the floor is yours, son.
Thank you, my dear Chair. And I will try to be as quick as possible, even if after this panel, a lot of things could be said. But I'm glad that it was the source of a real and clear conversation between us. But the most important lesson I think that has to come out from this panel is that institution has to act only after analysis, facts, investigation, and elaboration, because we have to work on facts. And I thank the experts for being here and supporting us. Therefore, the institution has to act, and I think that we have to be really worried about what came out. In 2002, as Mr. Polizzi said, the speediness of radicalization was taking like 16 months. It was a long trip to radicalization. Today, thanks also to artificial intelligence, could take only a few weeks. So that is the reason why institution, international organization, and when I speak about institution, I'm not speaking only about parliament. I'm speaking about also university, schools, civil society, as to work quickly and act. The support to our resolution could be a small step, but the main support has to come out from this organization in order to support more and more partnership, in order to involve all the organization to fight our main target, that is radicalization and terrorism. So thank you again to the chair, thank you to the secretariat, thank you to the panelists, but mainly thank you to all of you that you came here to Rome and gave this kind of a very high quality contribute. Thank you very much.
As we had a great
Hello. Yes, we'll just take a picture with the panel, and then in a few minutes we will start the final concluding session with Mr. Zoffili, Mr. Kamil Aydin, Mr. Irene Karalambides, and Mr. of course Gianni. Thank you. Just bear with us for a few minutes.
Di nuovo buongiorno a tutti.
Welcome once again, and let us now start the final and closing session. of this two-day conference on the fight against organized crime. I will now leave the floor to the special representative on Southeast Europe, Kyriakos Adiani. You have the floor.
Dear colleagues, dear friends, as we concluded the fourth Inter-Parliamentary Forum of Southeast Europe, delegations to the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, I want to thank each of you for your active participation, your thoughtful contribution, and your continued commitment to regional cooperation. Especially, I would like to thank our keynote speakers for their contribution and insights. Our discussions today have made clear that organized crime is not just a legal or security issue. It is a profound challenge to democratic governance, economic development, and the rule of law. But they have also demonstrated the strength of our shared will to confront this threat, all of us together. We have heard valuable insights and ideas and concrete proposals, from improving legislative frameworks and increasing transparency to enhancing cross-border cooperation and investing in prevention through education and civic engagement. Let us carry these ideas forward, not only within our own institutions, but also across our region, with renewed sense of urgency and, most of all, collective purpose. The OSCE Parliamentary Assembly offers us a vital platform, not only for dialogue, but for action also. Let us make full use of it. In doing so, we help ensure that Southeast Europe continue to move toward greater stability, prosperity, and resilience. Let me close by once again thanking our generous Italian host, and in particular, my friend, Mr. Zoffili, for bringing us together in this spirit of solidarity and shared responsibility. May our efforts here today lay the groundwork from tangible progress and deeper cooperation in the months ahead, or in the tide ahead, but also in the period. Thank you once again, Mr. Zoffili. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Grazie.
Thank you so much, Kyriakos, for your very kind words. And now I'll leave the floor to Irene Karalambides, Special Representative on Fighting Corruption.
The discussions have reaffirmed that what all of us know. Corruption, organized crime, and terrorism are deeply interlinked threats that transcend borders and weaken the very foundations of our societies. But they have also reminded us of something even more powerful: the potential of cooperation, of institutional integrity, and of political courage. We do not fight this phenomena in isolation. Our responsibility as parliamentarians goes beyond drafting legislation. It is about fostering cultures of accountability, strengthening oversight mechanisms, and ensuring that justice is not selective, but consistent and far-reaching. Yesterday and today, we've heard from colleagues who are determined to make change happen, from regions that face evident challenges but share the same goal: to serve the public good with honesty and resolve. The fight against corruption is not just a matter of law enforcement. It is a moral and political imperative. Let us leave this forum with additional renewed commitment. Let us take the knowledge, experiences, and good practices shared here and apply them in our respective countries, not just as words, but as action. And let us never forget the simple but profound truth: by fighting corruption, we improve the well-being of our citizens and exercise high democracy. That is reason enough to never look away from the phenomena of corruption. As an outcome of this conference, I have submitted a supplementary item on addressing the nexus between corruption, organized crime, and terrorism ahead of the annual session of OSCE in Porto. I believe this is the best way to acknowledge the importance of this conference that Mr. Eugenio Zoffili has hosted here in Rome, and for that we are very grateful, and thank you, Eugenio. You've done excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you so much, Irene, for your concluding remarks and for your contribution to today's and yesterday's conference. I will now leave the floor to the Chairperson of the Ad Hoc Committee on Countering Terrorism of the OSCE, Kamil Aydin. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Esteemed participants and distinguished guests, as we conclude this Inter-Parliamentary Conference on the fight against organized and serious crime in the OSCE region, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to all speakers and participants for your invaluable insights and contributions. Our discussions over the past 2 days have been both informative and thought-provoking. They have helped us deepen our understanding of the complex and evolving challenges posed by organized crime, corruption, and terrorism. We have also seen clearly how these threats are interconnected, feeding off each other and spreading instability across our region. As chair of the Ad Hoc Committee on Countering Terrorism, allow me to briefly reflect on some key takeaways from our final session on terrorism trends in the OSCE region, youth radicalization. The first one, the crime-terror nexus is growing stronger. We are facing a fast-evolving security landscape where organized crime, corruption, and terrorism are becoming ever more intertwined. New technologies and cryptocurrencies are being exploited to recruit, finance, and carry out attacks. Corruption enables both organized crime and terrorism. Terrorism is often financed through criminal networks, and organized crime creates the fertile ground for extremist ideologies to spread. Confronting these challenges demands a comprehensive, collaborative, and innovative approach, one that brings together parliaments, governments, civil society, academia, communities, tech companies, and the private sector. The second one, youth radicalization to violent extremism on the rise. We are deeply concerned by the increasing use of AI-generated content in disinformation campaigns and the growing circulation of extremist material online, especially content aimed at children and teenagers. Tragically, our youth is becoming a prime target of terrorist propaganda as they spend more and more time on social media and gaming platforms. Equally troubling is the rise of nihilistic violent movements. This is not about a clear ideology. It's a toxic mix of hate, anger, and the rejection of all societal norms. In this case, violence is no longer a means to an end. It is the end. This kind of extremism is difficult to define, hard to detect, and even harder to prevent. It challenges our traditional frameworks for counter-terrorism and requires new thinking and new tools as well. The third one is the parliamentarians must lead by example. In the face of these evolving threats, our role as legislators is more critical than ever. We have a unique responsibility, not only to shape effective policies and legislation, but also to engage directly with our communities. We must help build resilience against new forms of violent extremism, extremism that threatens the very foundation of our societies, our shared values, our trust in one another, our way of living together. I encourage each of you to take the insight gained here in Rome back to your parliaments, your offices, and your communities. Our work does not end with this conference. It begins with the commitment to turn these discussions into concrete action. Upholding fundamental freedoms, protecting democratic values, and promoting cooperation across all sectors remain our strongest tools in the fight against violent extremism and terrorism. In this spirit, I am proud that our committee has tabled a draft resolution on preventing youth radicalization to violent extremism and terrorism through education and media and information literacy. It's a vital step in the right direction, emphasizing the importance of equipping our youth with critical thinking skills through targeted civil education and media literacy programs. It calls for closer monitoring of AI tools, as well as for stronger efforts to prevent algorithmic bias and misuse of violent extremism and purposes, of course. In conclusion, I would like to once again thank the Italian Parliament for hosting us in this extraordinary setting here in Eternal City, Rome. My sincere gratitude goes to Special Representative Eugenio Zoffili and the entire Italian delegation to the OSCE for making this conference possible. A special thanks as well to Mrs. Gallardini, Ms. Califano, and Ms. Perozzi. Your tireless efforts and dedication have not gone unnoticed. Thank you. Thank you for your participation, and thank you for your hosting. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Grazie. Thank you. Thank you for your profound words. I would rather stand up for thank you all once again and to say goodbye. I would really like to thank every single one of you wholeheartedly for taking part in this two-day conference on the fight against organized crime. We have created a new format which I believe might be used again in the future. It's a winning format as far as I'm concerned. We brought together different issues: corruption, the fight against organized crime, terrorism, the forum on Southeast Europe countries. It was extremely insightful for all of us. I would like to thank the Albanian delegation as well for being here, and they also actively participated in the debates. They expressed their positions, and the same goes for Algeria and other partner states for the OSCE, as well as Armenia. Thank you for being here, and thank you to the Austrian and Azerbaijani delegation. Azaik was also a speaker in this conference, and then Belgium, Bulgaria, Bosnia-Herzegovina. Thank you. Croatia, thank you, Croatian friends. Cyprus, of course, which is very well represented among the speakers. And then the Czech Republic. Hi, Lucy, thank you so much. Finland, with our President Pia Kauma. Then the French delegation was here too. Georgia, Germany, Greece. The Hungarian delegation was also represented here by the Hungarian ambassador to Italy. Then the Irish delegation, thank you once again for your hospitality during the session in Dublin. And of course, our Italian delegation. Then the Japanese delegation, our partner country represented by the Japanese embassy in Italy. Then Luxembourg. Thank you, dear colleagues. And I hope you'll have a safe journey home. Then I would like to thank the Mongolian delegation, and then Montenegro was also represented here. Thank you, dear friends and colleagues. Then North Macedonia, thank you to you too. Poland, Romania, there you are. Thank you so much for participating. We've just come back from the observation mission in Romania, which was coordinated by our colleague Potchova. We were there for 2 weekends and we worked together with you. Then the delegation from San Marino, our neighbors, our very close neighbors. Then the Serbian delegation, the Spanish delegation, it's always a pleasure to have you here. The Swedish delegation, thank you. Thank you, Björn. What can I say? Thank you so much for your activity in the OSCE. Then the Turkish delegation, I hope you'll teach me some more Turkish words. Then the Ukrainian delegation, we are always on your side, and I would like to ask for a round of applause for the Ukrainian delegation. Not just with our heart, but also with our concrete actions, we support you with our institutional powers, political competence, as well as at government level. And then the United Kingdom, thank you for participating. I would really like to thank the OSCE Secretariat, Mr. Bonabello, Maria Luce. I'll surely forget someone, but through Mr. Bonabello, I would really like to thank everyone. Our President Pia Kauma, the Secretary General Roberto Montella, the Italian delegation once again, our Secretariat. I would like to thank the Secretary of Delegation, Valeria Gallardini, the whole team of the International Services Department, Ms. Califano, Ms. Berozzi, and every single official of the Chamber of Deputies and of the Senate of the Republic who worked hard on the successful outcome of this conference. I would also like to thank all keynote speakers from the governments. We had Vice Prime Minister Matteo Salvini and the Secretary of State Céline Molteni, all representatives from the police, from the Guardia di Finanza, from the Carabinieri Corps. They all provided high-level insights during this conference. Our agents, our officials, that every single day, every single minute, work professionally to ensure our security, not just the security of Italian citizens, but for the security of all of us. I also want to look forward, look to the future. I'll see you at the annual session in Porto very soon. It will be a pivotal time for our Parliamentary Assembly. We will also have to elect the new president, and I would like to submit a proposal looking at the future and building on this very conference. I think, and I like to be very concrete, I think this forum could be replicated. I would like to propose a forum of legality. We have a forum on Southeast Europe, we have a forum on youth, one on terrorism and other issues. I would like to introduce a new one, a forum on legality. And I'm looking at every single country. I would like every single country to maybe put forward a name of a representative that can take part in this project to fight against mafias and organized crime. We really need to stand together to solve this issue. Of course, people here have different political opinions, but the OSCE must stay united. We are a team. We need to work together towards a common goal to uphold our freedom, our security. And this is a war. We need to carry on the war against mafias, against organized crime, and this is a war we need to win in order to have peace. Thank you wholeheartedly. I hope that you felt very welcome here in Italy, and I'll see you again in Italy for maybe a new conference that we're working on. Thank you once again, and the applause is for all of you.